name is Paul. Already, Alyce was a founding mother of the Long Beach Women's Shelter. She's been an absolute staunch advocate for protecting women and preventing violence in our community. We've had her on our calendar every other year, every third year. We actually have some videotape from a previous time that Alyce was here that was on YouTube, and the prosecutor used it supposedly against Alyce in the Jodi Arias trial, which we will be hearing more about. So please welcome me. We are so delighted and absolutely undeterred to bring Alyce LaViolette to you this morning. Please join me.
I am the poster girl for misrepresentation in the media, so I want to first of all thank End Abuse Long Beach for their guts, because I know they received some really nasty stuff, which I did too, and it was a very unpopular case. It was tried in the media, and I'm going to talk about that when I talk about what kind of abuse are we talking about. But also to know that I have never taken a case I didn't believe in. I turn down cases regularly. I don't do expert witness as my way of life. In fact, I'm not sure, I've turned down 3 or 4 cases since the Arias case because people saw that and wanted me to testify. I was also the topic of discussion in Sacramento for the expert witnesses around the state who testify in domestic violence and child abuse cases, none of whom would touch the Arias case. And every single one of them said in hundreds of cases they have never seen a more abusive, disrespectful prosecutor than Juan Martinez. Lenore Walker called around a case, and you all familiar with the name Lenore Walker? Yeah, Lenore's great. Anyway, Lenore called, she was an expert witness in a case in Arizona, and said, if Juan Martinez is the prosecutor, I'm dropping off the case. She won't take the case either. This is the first time social media, headline news, and I'm talking about Dr. Drew, who is very dangerous as far as I'm concerned, because he sounds sane, unlike Nancy Grace and Jane Velez Mitchell, who don't sound nearly as sane, but they tried the case on the media before the case ever went on. And when you look at what's happening in the media in terms of high-profile cases, I think it's quite amazing that the media has chosen 3 young women, Casey Anthony, Amanda Knox, and Jodi Arias, to pillory, to paint as monsters, to paint as whores and sluts, to try in the media, whether you agree with it or not agree with it. I don't agree with trying people in the media. And they pick 3 young women and then pillory them for looking dead when they're on the stand, for looking like this. I think Amanda Knox's mother, and I saw her on The View, said, what do you expect them to look like? They have been, they get hate mail regularly. They are crucified, and I have a sense of what that's like, because if you Google my name now, it used to be really nice. I used to like to Google my name, but I don't Google my name anymore, because there's a lot of stuff on the internet, which there was a collision of an out-of-control courtroom, and by the way, the Andrews, the 2 judges, Brad and Deborah, who are friends of mine, called me to see how I was, and they said they have never seen a more out-of-control courtroom. They never would have allowed what went on in that courtroom, and they said there's no courtroom they've ever been in that would have allowed what went on in that courtroom. So at the end, I've got some clips, just a clip of actually the Snow White Wicked Witch, which I did here. I did with Snow White, a Battered Woman. Thought it was kind of a catchy title, but you'll see what happened with that and see what happened with the media with that. So at any point that you guys have questions, well, first of all, how many of you are familiar at all with the Jodi Arias trial? Okay, most people, it was all over the news. In fact, I used to walk through the airport like this because people still recognize me. And I have done sessions in the gates at the airport with people who come up to me and say, do you really believe what you said on a stand? Or we really loved what you said, or go girl, you know, that kind of thing. But I had a man come up to me in the gate in San Francisco who said, you know, my father called me names for a long time. Do you think that affected me? And I think I'm an alcoholic. That's my wife over there. And he talked to me for an hour. And I waved at his wife. She waved back. I've got a lot of BFFs now who I never knew before. And the other thing that was real interesting is there is a Twitter feed out there that allegedly I'm doing. I don't even know how to tweet. I don't even know if that's what you call it. I don't do it. Somebody took out a Facebook page and they're me on Facebook, and I don't know how to do that either. I'm not on Facebook. Thank God I don't have an email address on my, but I did get calls, plenty of calls. But I also got calls from battered women literally all over the world, all over this country and all over the world. I'm going to read something that one of the women sent to me, but saying they kept me going through this case because what was so different about this case, and I've done expert witness for 29 years, and for any of you who've seen Sin by Silence or know Brenda Klubine, Brenda's case was the first case I ever worked on. And Brenda is someone I respect. Brenda is someone who will never go on Dr. Drew again because of the way he talked about me. And by the way, he had experts on, and y'all ought to be upset about this. He had experts on who had PhDs. None of them had any experience in domestic violence, and they were all commenting on the testimony. I like to call the television stations and use different accents. So they believe they're getting calls from different people. I think it works really well. I do that with the White House hotline too, so you know, feel free to, I did that the first time in 1984. They did one of the first domestic violence documentaries that was ever done. It was on Two in the Town, which used to be the show where they would do all the you know, best hot tub places and spas and where to eat. And they did a documentary on domestic violence. And they said, if we get a lot of response from this, we'll do something else. Well, they got an Emmy for it. It was terrific. They did a really good job. So in the shelter, there were 6 of us sitting around, and we all were calling and just using different accents and calling them so they'd get a lot of response. And the last call I made, I said, this has been an answer to prayer. I have been, but you know, I did this whole thing. And they put me on with a producer that I worked with, and I thought for sure I'd get busted, but she took everything I said seriously. So there you go. You can fool the media. It's not hard. Anyway, what I want to talk about is abuse. And what I want to start with is research. How many of you like to read research? No. Okay, there are about 7 or 8 hands. Susan, I saw your hand go up. By the way, I want to thank, I see so many people here who I have loved for years and years and years, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you for supporting me, and thank you for having the courage to go on with this. The first speaking engagement, by the way, I did after the trial was 2 weeks after, and I was keynoting for the collaborative law practice, and I was also doing a 6-hour workshop, and we had Manhattan Beach police, plainclothes police, that were there the entire time because of the death threats. And they had my back. Everybody has had my back except for the Corporate Alliance to End Partner Violence, which I helped found. And the executive director just sent me an email and said, because of your testimony on the Arias case, we'd like you to resign. And nothing, no call, no nothing. And I don't even know if the board knows about it, but I've been taken off. So that's, but everybody else has had my back. And I thank you for the courage that it's had, you know, that you had to have my back. And Paula. Okay, so research informs our policies. Most of the hands-on people that I know do not like to read research, but not reading research is dangerous. And I want to talk about two pieces of research that are being used right now, and when we talk about violence. But the first piece is an old piece of research. It's the piece of research that actually got us mandatory arrest in California. And it was done in Duluth, Minnesota in the mid-'80s. And it was done by, I think, Shepard and Shepard. And it was a piece of research where police officers were randomly assigned one of three options when they rolled on a domestic violence case. The first was arrest, the second was counseling, and the third was separation. Being a hands-on advocate, I didn't read the research. None of us did. We presumed that counseling meant that the person went into a counseling program, batter's intervention program, battered women's support group. That separation meant that they took the person who was abusive and put them somewhere else, or that the woman went to a relative's house or went into a shelter, and that arrest meant arrest. Well, what was discovered after a 6-month period of time was that arrest worked better than counseling or separation in cases of domestic violence. Now, what we found out was that counseling meant that the police officer counseled the people on site. So police officers don't have a whole bunch of time to counsel people on site. And that's what counseling meant. Separation meant the police officer kind of told the person to take a chill pill and walk around the block and cool off. So of those three things, arrest worked better. The researchers, and by the way, there was a 6-month follow-up, and the only thing that they measured was recidivism. Was somebody rearrested? Now, believe me, lots of people have a cycle that goes longer than 6 months, and most people are pretty cautious after they've been arrested about doing anything that will get them arrested again. So the researchers said, don't base policy on this research. The soundbite in the media was, arrest works better than counseling and separation in cases of domestic violence. Within 2 weeks, there was policy being created all over this country, either pro or mandatory arrest. Now, I'm all for pro arrest. I'm not for mandatory anything, because I think that the deal with mandatory is to control people who have bad discretion. But people who have bad discretion just suck. And they're going to suck better. They're going to fly under the radar after they, that's what's going to happen. But it's going to control people who have medium discretionary powers and good discretionary and great. They're going to tie the hands of those folks. And I think anybody who does hands-on work knows what I'm talking about. Now, that's one piece of research. The second piece of research is the one that's being used now to talk about gender equivalence in domestic violence. How many of you are having any problems at all with groups that are saying women are as violent as men in intimate partner relationships? That is flying around. By the way, fathers' rights groups are using it. I talked to Mary Strauss, who did the original research, and he said battered women's groups misused my data for years, which is absolutely the truth. And he said, and now the men's rights groups are misusing my data. But here's the data, and see what you think of it, and see what you think is problematic with it. It was basically, there's a list called the conflict tactics scale. You all familiar with conflict tactics? It's just a list that starts with what's called low-level aggression to what's called high-level aggression. Low-level aggression is pushing, slapping, grabbing, hitting, restraining, that sort of thing. High-level aggression is kicking, hair pulling, punching, choking, we're calling it strangling now, not choking, strangling, use of a weapon, that sort of thing. So there's this list. And what Mary and Richard Gellis did was and their team was to call 1,000 men and 1,000 women randomly. And if they reached Peggy at Peggy's house, they'd only talk to Peggy and not Peggy's partner. If they got hold of Ronan, they'd talk to Ronan and not Ronan's partner. And they didn't look at gay-lesbian relationships. They only looked at heterosexual relationships. And they asked people in an argument, have you ever done anything on this list? And if you said yes, you were put in the violent group. And if you said no, you were put in the liars group, the non-aggressive group, the non-aggressive group. So, okay, so does anybody see any problems with this research? What do you see as problematic with this? Yeah?
It's working in a binary, it's not true, so things don't happen in just a concrete black or white binary.
Absolutely, it's not this or this, it's not just black or white binary, there's a lot of gray. Okay, so that's one thing. What else? Yeah, Susan.
It doesn't have any context for under what circumstances did you do X, Y, or Z.
Really important. No context. There's no context, nobody knows why. Nobody knows result, right? Nobody knows any of that. So we don't know if the person hit in self-defense, if there was a buildup of pressure in this family, if this was an isolated event, if it was a pattern of events. We don't know the result. We don't know if people were injured. We don't know if people were afraid. We don't know if people just blew it off. We don't know. The acts were not gendered. Okay? So pushing, slapping, grabbing, hitting, all those things were considered mild acts of aggression. Kicking was considered severe aggression. Who do you think kicks more, males or females? Females. Females were rated more aggressive and more severely aggressive in that study. Okay, now, the other thing is verbal report. Verbal report is notoriously unreliable. If I call and I talk to you and you're being abused and your partner's standing there, what do you think you're going to do? If we believe people, if I call someone who's abusive, do you think they're going to say, yeah, I'm abusive? No. And what if they called any of us? Would any of you even participate in a study where somebody's wanting to find out how aggressive you are? The only study I ever participated in was, I was 17. I'll never forget it. It was a sex study. I'd never had any. But I felt pretty, alive when I was in the study. And I was quite active in sports, and so they asked me if I'd had orgasms, and I said, yeah. And I'd never had sex. They'd asked me that first. And because I thought orgasms were muscle twitches, which I'd had plenty of as an athlete. And so as I went on in the study, the guy that was questioning me started breathing heavier. And I said, excuse me, do you have COPD? And he said, and so that was my study. So I haven't done another one since then, because my mother told me that was not true. That was not a real study when I went home and asked her some of the things that I was... Yeah, I could talk to my mother. It was great. So, for those of you who are going, you talk to your mother? I don't know. So, okay, so this study, what happened in this study, going back to the Strauss-Gallup study, is that 50% of the men who were interviewed said that they had done something physically aggressive to a female partner without a context. We don't know why. We don't know what the situation was. The battered women's movement, and I don't know, for all of you who've been around for a while, you know this. How many of you have heard 50% of all women will be battered in their lifetime? That was absolutely a stat that was given at almost every conference I went to for 15 years, and I stopped using it pretty quick because it didn't make sense to me. It just didn't make sense. And so, but that stat was used. And I said quite frequently, if we continue to use this stat, it is going to come back to bite us because it is incorrect. And it has come back to bite us, particularly in family court and looking at child custody. Now, nobody looked at the other side of the data until the O.J. Simpson trial. And the defense team grabbed that data and they found that 52% of the women who were interviewed said they had done something physically aggressive to a male partner during the course of an argument. Views section of the LA Times, why are we worried about battered women? There are more battered men.
Oh.
This was never a study that looked at domestic violence. This was a study that looked at isolated acts of aggression. There are big studies being done, and they, to get federal funding, you still have to use the conflict tactics scale, and that is still misrepresenting the data. And there are mega studies. Archer in 2000 did a compilation study looking at all this stuff and found that you know, women were more violent than men. Well, some of the new stuff that's coming out is looking at the psychological impact of physical aggression on males and females in a heterosexual. Once again, they don't do a lot with gay and lesbian. Heterosexual study. And what they're finding is that when a woman hits a man, the man tends to get angry or laugh it off because he still has a sense of power unless she uses an equalizer, right? If a woman is packing or has an Uzi, you're gonna get scared. It's not that we can't batter men, it's just that it's harder. It's harder to generate the same level of fear. And when you look at women who are hit, the psychological impact tends to be humiliation and fear. So there are these two different things. Now, I think you have a handout, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is, yeah, I was so efficient. You have one handout. I don't want you to have to, you know, go home and read a lot. So, but this is, I've redone this many times. I actually used this in the Arias case because for 3 days I got to do pure education on the stand. And that was amazing for me. And I worked with the attorney. I was telling Waverly when we were in the restroom, I was on the stand for 3 weeks. That's unheard of. And I think that's why I became a lightning rod for things. You're not on the stand for 3 weeks. You're on the stand for 1 day as an expert. But we would work we would be in court all day, and then we would go back and work for another 6 to 10 hours every night on the case so that we could ask the right questions. And we were finding evidence, by the way, up until the last, I think 3 days before I testified, and we didn't know how much we'd find. There were boxes and boxes and boxes of things, and I hadn't seen them all. And anyway, and by the way, I didn't take this case at first, because what Jodi did was so severe. She shot him, for those of you who are unaware of the case, she shot him and stabbed him 27 times. And I take homicide cases I take all my cases very seriously if I'm going to take them. And I didn't take it at first because what they sent me didn't, to me, justify what had happened. And so they asked me to fly out and interview Jodi. And the first day I went out, I spent 8 hours in jail with her. We had no food and no water. We sat and talked for 8 hours. She answered a lot of questions, and then they gave me more evidence. And as I got more evidence, I was open to taking the case. And so that's how I came. I believe she was a battered woman, and I don't believe you premeditate that kind of chaos. I do not believe you leave evidence all over if you premeditate a murder. And also, what it doesn't look at, and I think many of us don't want to bring up so much, are victims and their anger. There is no way to be victimized over time and not have rage. And we have got to deal with the rage. Because I think what happened with Jodi was started out in self-defense. And then you get out of here. You're not in your frontal lobe anymore. You're all over the place. And I think that's what happened in this case. That's what I believe. I didn't have to testify about premeditation. I had to testify about domestic violence, and that's what I did. And I testified in terms of a range of abusive behaviors. Because what was interesting to me were also calls I got from battered women. I began to think my middle name was piece of shit. And I'm serious. And that was the nicest thing that was said. I decided to try to have fun with it and change my name to Piece O' Shit because I am Irish. And but what happened that was interesting was listening to battered women who said, I've had a gun held to my head for 20 years, right? And they're still there, and they probably hate themselves for being there. And they don't want to recognize anything less than that as domestic violence. And I find that to be true in the court and in the public, even with all we've done over all these years, that so often, because media representations of battered women say that they are pure as the driven snow, and that perpetrators are one-dimensional evil monsters, that what winds up happening is if that is not what appears in court, they don't know what to do with it because they're still believing it. And the juries believe it. So we have a lot of education to do. We still have a lot of education to do. And by the way, I believe that what Jodi did was monstrous. But Jodi Arias is not a monster. The guy from Cleveland's a monster. The people who have patterns and continue to do all these things. These young women that have been pilloried, I don't even know anymore, having seen what the media does with this stuff, what's true and what isn't. I have no way of knowing. Because I know what they did with me, with my testimony. I know what they did with Jodi. I know how they painted her. And so what I started doing back in 1998 because of work I'd seen from Michael Johnson. I didn't like what you're talking about, which is that binary, abuse or not abuse. What are we looking at if we're going to do assessment? And so when I start assessment, I start with me. And what I mean by that is we tend to judge people on our yardstick in terms of what's dangerous and what isn't. So let me ask you, how many of you consider yourselves more volatile when you get angry? And what I mean by that is maybe you wave your arms around a little, maybe your voice gets loud, maybe your veins stand out, maybe your eyeballs pop out of your head a little bit, you get a little louder, maybe you drool a little bit out of the corner. How many of you would consider yourselves more volatile when you get angry? And the rest of you are passive aggressive, is that right? Cool. Okay. So let me ask you, for those of you who are more volatile, how do you feel when you're trying to communicate, usually with a partner, somebody that's really important to you? How do you feel when they kind of go? You guys are getting pissed off right now just thinking about it. I don't know. So what happens? What happens to you? What does it mean to you when your partner or somebody you care about and you're trying to communicate with does that? What does it mean to you? Yeah, Waverly.
I'm not important to you.
You're not important, and take that a step further. If you're not important, then what?
Then I have no worth. I'm just nothing.
You're nothing in their eyes.
Yeah.
They don't care about you.
No.
Okay, so we go from this to they don't care. Now, for those of you who are more passive with your anger, how do you feel when somebody's coming at you who is louder, who looks and sounds angry? How do you feel when that happens? Frightened. Okay, because what we do is we judge people on our yardstick, which is not, so if I see somebody, I'm scared of the quiet ones, because we all know about the quiet ones, right? I'm sorry. Okay, us loudmouths, we just shout, you know, we don't do anything bad. We just frighten people who are less loud. but anyway, so what winds up happening is we tend to judge based on us. And I had a real interesting experience one night in my men's group. We had a light bird colonel from Special Forces come in. It was his first night in group, and we always ask people what happened to get them there. And he said, they said it was terrorist threats. Now, they call them criminal threats now after 9/11, but I said, well, what kind of threat did you make? He said, I told my wife that if I didn't get to see my son, I would put her in the trunk of my car and take her on a one-way trip. And then I called her sister and told her the same thing. Not a particularly bright light bird colonel thing to do, because he left it on the answer machine. They, of course, went to the police, and he was arrested, and he had to come into a batter's intervention program. I said to him, you know, if you said that to me, I'd take you real seriously. I said, first of all, you say it like you mean it, but more importantly, you're in Special Forces. You've been trained to kill. So he sort of blew me off, you know, like, yeah. And after group that night, two of the biggest, most volatile guys in group came up and said, you know, Alyce, that guy is scary. You know those quiet ones. And you know, he's the kind of guy who could come back to group next week with a gun, and he could kill all of us. And I said, I don't think he's going to do that. And I thought later, well, what if I'm wrong? And then I thought, well, there'll be no witnesses. But so what happened? So what happened was I said to them, would you guys be willing to tell him that he scares you? And they said, well, we're scared. And I said, well, think about it. I said, think about it. It'd be very powerful if you could do that. It would be a very powerful thing. And they said, okay. So the next week they said to him, you know, you scared us. And let me tell you why. You had no feeling in your eyes. Your eyes were cold. Your jaw was clenched. Your tone had force behind it, but it had no feeling. And it was the first time this guy took seriously that he could scare somebody, because the way we talk about anger, the way we appear when we're angry is significant. And I was thinking, somebody back there said they're from the Housing Authority. And yeah, I did something years ago in the Housing Authority, because they had I'm sure they had more than one angry employee, but there was at least one that scared other people. And so we did an anger workshop and talked about styles of anger, instead of singling this person out to see if it had any impact on the way people felt, you know, after they looked at style. Because we tend to do that. So when I start assessment, I have to look at them and not me. Who they are, how they appear, that kind of thing. And then I started looking at Michael Johnson's work. He did a continuum, and I like that, except he kind of had only 2 points in his continuum. When he started, it was common couple violence and patriarchal terrorism. Common couple violence, and Michael Johnson did this in '94. Common couple violence was what most of us see, which is, unless you work in a shelter, which is mild contusions, bruising, mild injury, and low-level attack, which is pushing, grabbing, slapping, whatever, like that. Now, that doesn't correlate at all with the level of fear. You can have a very high level of fear, and that's one of the things we need to look at. We need to take into account that low-level violence can cause very high-level fear, depending on who it's directed at and a lot of things. So I like 5 points, and the other thing I started seeing was that there were healthy families that had isolated acts of aggression. That if we went around the room and asked everybody in the room, have you ever done anything aggressive? Particularly when you were younger. How many of you are in your early 20s here? Fine, okay. What? Yeah. Yeah, I was in my early 20s 40 years ago. But we remember, if you're not in your early 20s, remember the nature of the arguments you had in intimate relationships in your early 20s, right? You could stay up all night and argue. You never had to solve a problem, but you could stay up all night, and that was kind of cool, right? You could, what you said and what you did hopefully has changed over time because you've learned some skills. You don't take the same things personally. I mean, we learn a lot over time, hopefully. But in our early 20s, so youth is a factor when you look at aggression. And it's important to look at age with what people say, what they feel entitled to do, that kind of thing. Now, what I did was create a 5-point continuum, and I started with what I call common couple aggression, which means an act of aggression that can happen in an otherwise healthy family or an otherwise healthy couple. And that's an act of aggression that is isolated. It occurs in a family where there is a balance of power between the two people. They are friends, they like each other. It is an aberrant act. It is not something that happens regularly. It does not create fear. It comes from people who do not believe that aggression is a good way to solve problems. So there tends to be genuine remorse. But the things, some of the things you want to look at are balance of power and genuine remorse in this family and lack of fear. Okay, one of the things I did in the Arias case from the very beginning was to look at power. Creating context is really important when you're doing assessment. Looking at how people get in violent relationships if they don't have a big history of violent even then. But in Jodi's case, she met Travis in Las Vegas at an event. She was part of, have you heard of prepaid legal? That was not something I had ever heard of, but prepaid legal, it's kind of, I think it's a pyramid thing. It's one of those, right? They say that, you know, their thing is if somebody tells you it's a pyramid scheme, just tell them they're crazy. Yeah, well, it's a pyramid scheme. Anyway, but he was a motivational speaker for prepaid legal. And he came up to Jodi and he said, "Hi, I'm Travis." And he singled her out. Now, she had just left a 4-year relationship where she very much wanted to marry the guy. He wasn't ready to get married, but he cared for Jodi a lot, and he's testified for her in the trial. Now, for those 4 years they were together, there's no sign of her being borderline personality, which she was described as, or bipolar, or any of those things. In fact, they had a healthy relationship, it appeared. And he was divorced, had a wife, an ex-wife, and the ex-wife and him both felt very secure with Jodi with their little boy. Okay, so what happened was Travis came up to her. He invited her to an event. She said no. And her friend said, "Hey, he's cute and he likes you. Why don't you go?" So she said, she called him back and she said, "Okay, I'll go, but I don't have anything to wear." Or he called her, I can't remember if he called her a second time or she called him. But he got her something to wear. He took her to an executive director's banquet. He introduced her to all the big players in the organization. He got her seats in the front so she could sit very close to the stage. He wowed her. He gave her the Book of Mormon and challenged her to read it. At the same time, he was pushing to have sex with her, which happened. Now, I'm not saying she had boundaries, because she didn't. But I'm saying I looked at the power from the beginning, and there was quite a bit of power difference in that relationship. Why do people pick people who have substantially less power than they do? I always look at that, because I think it's really an important thing to look at. Now, second category is high conflict. And by the way, this is continuum. It's not like linear categories, but high conflict, what I mean by that, once again, there's still a balance of power, But the pattern is that these folks fight with each other and don't solve problems. So they gradually erode their friendship. And you see a lot of this in couples counseling. And probably most of you have been around people who you don't want to be around a lot because they talk disrespectfully to each other. They're not very nice to each other, but they don't tend to be afraid of each other. They're just both nasty to each other, and they're not fun to, hang with. And that's what I mean by high conflict. There's an erosion of the friendship. There's there's negative regard for each other. There's just a pattern of not solving problems. They may have sporadic acts of physical aggression, but there is no fear in this relationship, and the power tends to be pretty balanced. It's just an unhealthy relationship. Now, what I did with domestic violence is break it up into several categories: abuse, battering, and terrorism. Michael Johnson talked about patriarchal terrorism, which was looking at men and batterers groups and not looking at just what they did physically or emotionally to somebody, but also the use of the system. I worked on a murder case where the system that was used repeatedly was DCFS. There were repeated calls to the Department of Children and Family Services making anonymous child abuse reports. That was one of the systems that was used. Sometimes the religious system is used, spiritual systems for people. Sometimes the criminal justice system, where people will drag people through court until they have no money left. And I see that a lot in West Los Angeles, by the way. So those kinds of things. What I did was take off patriarchal terrorism and look at terrorism so we could look at gay lesbian relationships, female perpetrators. But I also wanted to look at what we see in terms of actual numbers. Who's doing what to whom. So what do I mean by abuse? How many of you have seen that sheet that says profile of a batterer? Or lethality checklist, yes. Right? And it says usually isolates partner, jealous, threats to kill, use of a weapon, that sort of thing. And it's very specific. And when people think the term abuser, that's what they think, usually. They think about the guy in like Sleeping with the Enemy, Burning Bad, J-Lo's Enough. The guy that when J-Lo takes him out at the end, everybody's going, all right. Because he's pure evil. And in 34 and a half years, I have not met that guy. Because here's what happens. When you make him that way, you also make the victim of his abuse, you make that person crazy and stupid. Right? Because why do you stay in a relationship? And still the biggest question, why do women stay? When I do training, the biggest question is still, what's wrong with her? Well, of course we think what's wrong with her because we think he has no redeeming qualities. Well, you don't get in a relationship with somebody with no redeeming qualities. I always say you could probably live with a serial killer for about a year, and if you were in love, you wouldn't notice. Because a serial killer would be on their absolute best behavior. And the energy of new love is bigger than the energy of fear. And it takes a long time for that energy to kind of calm down, right? Until you see who you're with. And then once it's calmed down, the symptoms of fear tend to be up there. And when you're dealing with folks who are abusive, they are more fear-based. The rage is covering up the fear, but a lot of the little guys we used to see in the shelter have grown up, right? And if we don't work together on this stuff, we just don't do a service to anybody. If we're not working together, which, by the way, the Association of Batterers Intervention Programs is having their conference on the Queen Mary next week. It's going to be real good if any of you want to go. They could use the support, for sure. Now, when I look at abuse, I look at what would be called lower level physical aggression, with longer periods of time between physical aggression, so people have a chance to recover, regroup. When I look at the threats in this group, they are not threats to kill. They are not threats to harm in general in a physical way. They are threats to abandon. They are threats to take the kids. They are threats to take money. They're all around the issues of abandonment more than they are around the issues of physical harm. It's more psychological harm. But the psychological abuse is very low level too. I mean, in these situations, you don't see people who are isolating their partners. They're not. They generally have friends, they're going out, they have jobs, they're not calling somebody on and off all day to see where they are. None of that stuff is going on. They're not using insidious ways of controlling people at all. When I talk about name calling in this group, the name calling is more generic. They may call you a bitch, a bastard, something, they may say bad words, but they do not character assassinate. And there's a difference when you look at character assassination and tearing somebody's. You don't necessarily see in this group a change in the victim's personality, which will tend to happen as you go further across the continuum. You see a change in the victim's personality. But in this group, you don't tend to see that. And the other thing is, in this group, they do what I call normal stalking. Now, you may say to yourself, what is normal stalking? We may do it ourselves. How many of you have had a relationship that ended and you weren't quite ready to have it end? Have you all had one of those? Have you ever called that person after it broke up just to hear their little voice on the machine? Or, yeah. Or drive by their house and kind of just check it out, see if anybody's there. Or show up somewhere where you think you might see them. And most of us do that till we've had time to grieve, we've had time to, sort of, figure it out a little bit, and then we slow down. Well, people in abusive relationships don't believe each other, right? I don't believe you're going to stop hurting me, and you don't believe I'm going to leave. So what winds up happening, right, is I keep pushing on it. In fact, on your red flag list, it'll say violation of protective order. Almost everybody I work with violates a protective order that has one. Almost every single person. What you want to look at when you're doing assessments is the quality of the violation. If somebody is walking up and looking in the window like that, it's different than somebody's going in and breaking in the door. And I remember one of my first cases at the shelter was a school teacher from Long Beach who said, he's breaking in, he's pushing me against the wall in front of the kids, and he's saying, where's your police protection now? Where's your help now? And then he would do things like park the car right across the street. So the kids and her are like on pins and needles because they don't know where he is. So I said to her, listen, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take a newspaper. I want you to take a picture of the car in relationship to the house. Put a newspaper on a car. I saw this on a TV show. So you get a lot from television if you watch the right channels. Anyway, so put the newspaper there, take a picture of the newspaper and the car in relationship to the house. Can you get your neighbors to sign statements if they've seen him sneaking around? And that's what she did, and we took that to court, and we got a bench warrant issued for him, and he never bothered her again. Because a lot of the folks are bullies. Even if they look real bad on paper, they're bullies and they'll back down. When you look at homicide and domestic violence, homicide occurs in less than 1/100%, I think it is, of domestic violence cases. We're all controlled by it, we're all afraid of it, but you also have to act in a way where you're not overreacting and making it worse. Right? What's going on? Now, I had a case back in, I think it was in the 90s, of a man who was sent down to LA County out of Alameda County. He had a restraining order that restrained him from Alameda County. You don't see that much. And of course they sent him to LA because we have like a Statue of Liberty that says, send us, send us your felons, send us your drug addicts, send us your hookers. We want them. We're big in rehab down here and we need practice, so we're better at our jobs. So what winds up happening is he comes down, right, and he's not a nice guy. He's been in jail for 8 months for violation of a protective order. How many of you have ever seen anybody go to jail for 8 months for protective order? I have never, except for him, ever. And the only reason he went to jail is because every time he went to court, he said to the judge, I'm going to kill that bitch. And finally, a judge got upset about it and said, stop saying that. And he kept saying it, and the judge put him in jail for 8 months. So when he came down, he was not a nice guy. He was somebody who moved less than in a positive direction than anybody almost that I've ever worked with. And he called me one day. He'd been in group probably, I don't know, 6 months or something. And he said, thanks for your help. I'm on my way to kill my wife. And I was trying to keep him on the phone. Now, one of the things that was terrific, and I think about when Carol Coley and I started working together in 1980, because Carol and Linda Gonzalez, who was the diversion officer, and Carol was the head of the department, we worked real closely on developing training for probation. But also, there was a great diversion unit in Long Beach where we actually got to work with probation officers. And they would actually call and say, is so-and-so coming to group? And there was follow-up, and there's none of that now. Everybody's on summary, unless you've done the most egregious thing there is. Everybody's on summary. We have no one to call. And because of the closing of the courts, the judges are basically warehousing. They're not even reading what we write about, people when we send them back to court. So what happened was I had a good connection with a probation officer. So he called me. I thought, he knows I'm a mandatory reporter. In fact, I said that on the phone, but he knew it anyway. So I thought, first of all, he has to fly up to Alameda County. So he knows I'm going to do something. I call the probation officer and I tell her what's happening. And she says, we got to do something. I said, yeah, can you contact his wife and let's bring her in as part of the team. So the three of us became the team about what's the intervention we're going to do here. And she said, he's successfully violated restraining orders many times. He could come up here and he could kill me. And I would live in fear all the time. I don't want to live in fear anymore. And his big thing was he wanted to see his kids. He was obsessing on that. He had obsessed on it. And basically, by the way, he didn't have a really great relationship with his two little girls. But we decided that we were going to do that. That she was going to fly down. I was going to meet them at my office in West LA. We're going to go out in a public place. And he was going to have time with his little girls, and I was going to be with her, because I'm from New Jersey, and I'm a bodyguard. And I don't know, adolescent omnipotence. I think a lot of us have it. So that was the plan. And that's where we started, and we're able to start with him. And he saw his children, and that was the time that he began to move, because once we had done that, she felt better. She was not as afraid. He was able to see his kids. We were able to make demands in group that he could do to get more time, and he would fly up, and we set up a system where he would fly up. His parents, who she trusted, would pick up the kids from daycare. She was totally out of the loop. Pick up the kids from daycare, take them back to his parents' house, and he would basically have monitored visits with his parents. And he would fly up in the day, come back in the evening. Then we could move to overnights. But he had to do things in group. He had to participate. He had to open his mind. the probation officer called me about a year after he left group, and she said, we did okay. She said, he's moved back up here, and they are not living together, they are not, married, they're divorced, but they are co-parenting. So when you're doing this work, if we don't do case by case, we are shortchanging everybody. We have the ability to be creative. We have the ability to do something that's different if we work together. We can't afford to be isolated, right? We cannot afford it. No more than the people we work with can afford it. Now, so that guy I would have put in battering, not in abuse. But when you're looking at abuse and you look at stalking, what you find is that once there has been time elapsed, the stalking behavior decreases. That tends to be true even in the battering area. The normal stalking is stalking that decreases over time. And this could be somebody, we've had people that are driving around the house 8 times a day or something like that. They're still not going to the house. You want to look at the quality. As one of the women at the shelter said, and it was pretty funny, she said, my husband is standing 101 yards or something from the house yelling stuff at me and yelling at me to come back and then yelling he's mad and then yelling this. And I said, but he's staying away, right? He's not coming within the distance. She said, yeah. I said, well, listen, give him a couple of weeks, he will do permanent damage to his vocal cords. And he will, and that's what happened. He couldn't talk. He was hoarse after a couple of weeks of this. And he never approached her. I said, if he comes closer to you, call the police. But what you see is somebody who's still intimidated by the law. You want to know that. You want to know if somebody cares at all. If they've got a big record, they probably don't care, and they probably know the system well enough not to be intimidated, and they probably know in LA County they'll only do 5 days for a 3-month sentence or something. So that's abuse. When you look at battering, you tend to see more areas of control. Actually, let me talk about another category I threw in that's between high conflict and abuse, and it's called separation instigated aggression. I did this because recently I've gotten women who've come in to see me and their partners are acting in a different way than they've ever acted since the separation or since they've talked about separation. Their partners have been aggressive, maybe they've thrown things, and the women are genuinely frightened. And there's been no history of domestic violence, because I do an assessment with them and really look at what's gone on over the time, and there hasn't been anything until this period of time. People tend to act out differently when they're going through a separation or a breakup. The other thing that we need to look at, and is not taken into account, by the way, in custody in family court, is the whole notion of secondary trauma that most women have. It is really important to look at the notion of vicarious or secondary trauma, because most women are frightened and take that fear and push it out of the way. Rose Coker and Ms. Rahi did a study back in the 80s looking at how many actions toward personal safety women take every day. For instance, not walking out at night by yourself. For instance, maybe looking under your car, looking in the back seat when you get in. For instance, carrying pepper spray. Because of this trial, I now carry pepper spray to walk to my bathroom in my office, which I didn't do before, but I do now. It's stuff that we are concerned about, because most women, by the time they're 30, have felt physically worn down in some situation, usually with a male. And that could be people catcalling you, that could be people groping you in the subway, that could be somebody coercing you on a date. But there is genuine fear that these women have, and it doesn't take as much to set it off. It takes more to set off fear, generally speaking, for a male, unless a male has a history of being victimized. And then you see that with men too. And when you see a man who's afraid, and over the years, I've seen a couple of men who I know were battered men, and they have looked psychologically like they're the female victim because they're absolutely afraid. But what had to happen to them to get to that level was usually far more severe. What's that?
We take a short break.
Oh, you take a break. Well, gee. Okay, I forget where I was, but I think I was at battering, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so when you look at battering, you're looking at this more entitlement from the perpetrator. You're looking at usually more physical aggression, more frequent physical aggression. You're looking at the beginning of controlling behavior where there might be isolation. It's a matter of degree, because when you move to terrorism, you're talking more about the kind of person that you see in the burning bed and sleeping with the enemy, even though they'll have other dimensions to them. But as you cross the continuum, what you begin to see are more levels of control. And I'm talking about stuff like GPS stalking now, email and stalking. A terrorist is not just going to threaten to kill you. A terrorist can tell you how they're going to do it. Now, I will also tell you this, that as you go across the continuum, what you begin to see is a change in the victim's personality, because there is more isolation. The worst cases of domestic violence tend to be positively correlated with the worst cases of isolation. So when I'm talking to somebody and I'm trying to do an assessment, one of the things I ask them is who they spend time with. I don't ask them about isolation. I ask them about questions that aren't about domestic violence, to find out about domestic violence. So I don't ask people, do you hit each other usually? I say, hey, what do you do when you argue? How do you solve problems? You know, and then you can come in on that. So if people say, well, I don't spend much time with other people, I can ask them why and find out if they're new to the area or whatever. But when you look at isolation, you can actually have a terrorist who never lays a hand on anybody. I did a murder case in '98 in Long Beach that was the Keach case, which it was a 77-year-old man who killed his daughter's batterer. And this fellow never laid a hand. Well, once he pulled her out of bed by the feet and he made her erase the names of all her male friends in her phone book, all her old connections. He financially abused her. He psychologically abused her. He made threats. She was terrorized. He then, when she finally left and stayed with her parents, terrorized the family. And eventually Mr. Keach, who actually was a prisoner of war during World War II for 4 years, eventually shot and killed this man, not about a mile from where I used to live. And I drove by to see where he lived, and because I was told it was a very well-funded case, and I thought, he lives in a house like my house. Where do people get that kind of money? And so I asked his daughter, how are you funding this case? They said, we're funding the case by using my father's retirement, taking a second out on his house, and taking a second out on my house. And I dropped my fee, because I thought, what would happen to me in that situation? How would I handle that? You know, your whole life, you spend your whole life. And this man absolutely suffered from PTSD that was untreated. He had seen people beheaded. He had seen people beaten and starved. He'd been beaten and starved. And toward the end of this case, he was so scared, he was sleeping on the floor in a fetal position. And his family didn't know what that meant. They just knew he was acting strange, but they were all acting strange because they were all afraid. The jury in Long Beach totally understood the non-physical domestic violence. It was amazing. but PTSD was the primary defense. They didn't get how somebody 50 years later could be affected. One of the exercises I do with the men in my men's group to develop empathy is to ask them to think about a time in their lives prior to the age of 10 where they felt powerless or afraid. I got this from Susan Schechter's work. For any of you who, Susan Schechter was a pioneer in the field. She passed away. She wrote Women and Male Violence, and she was a really wonderful person. And she wrote a pamphlet for people who work in shelters. I actually have it. It looks like the Dead Sea Scroll now. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I don't think anybody has one anymore, but there's one for women in the shelter, and there's one for the people who are working with women in the shelter. And she talks about victimization, right? So that's what I look at, because I want them to look at how, there are two things. When they can identify with their own victimization, right? When they can look at how they've been affected, and I'm doing prior to the age of 10 so they can look at the long-term effects of trauma. So when you do that, and they start getting in touch with their own victimization, and we did this just 2 weeks ago, and one of the young men in group admitted to being molested. The group was crying. The support he got in that room from the other men was kind of amazing. But what we then do with it is to say, what do you think it feels like when you do that to your partner or your children? How do you think they feel? Because once you've identified with your own feelings of pain and your own victimization, you can look at others. The other thing it does is to look at the fact that you can still be affected by something that happened 20, 30 years ago, and you want your partner to get over it real quick. You know, I see that with 12-step programs. Let it go, you know, like you can just drop it like a suitcase. But once they look at that they're affected 20 years later, 15 years later, 30 years later, it's easier for them to understand why their partners can't get over it that quickly. So building empathy is a really important thing. Now, by the way, when you're working in batterers intervention, and I don't like to label people. When I was doing training in Calgary, they will not say batterer anymore. They say people who use aggression or people who use violence, which I think is nicer. A lot of people do not come in to programs because they don't want to be labeled. I say, you know, 12-step programs are very accepted, right? In fact, it's cool to be in a 12-step program if you live in California, right? I mean, I was speaking at a Girl Scouts, a community panel for the Girl Scouts, and the other panel members, we were each taking a different topic, and the other panel members were saying, hey, you know, I have to leave right after this talk because I have an AA meeting. And the other person said, oh, you go to AA? I go to Al-Anon and ACA. The other one said, oh, you do? Well, I go to OA. Where do you go, Alyce? I said, Weight Watchers. I really wanted to be an A. You know, so I think, you know, when you look at the level of how do we make it acceptable for people to get help, because I think it's very hard. And I said this in this case, that both Jodi and Travis needed help. Two young people whose lives are totally destroyed because they couldn't get help. You know, and I think when you look at a continuum, one of the things that you tend to see is that most of the people who come into BIP programs are either abuse or battering. We tend to see far fewer terrorists because terrorists are not interested, and because a lot of them are in jail. So we don't see as many of them. We tend to see, we've had a few, and we've had people that if you look at on paper would certainly be seen as terrorists. But when you start working with them, they have the ability to take some things in and learn some things. Now, the other thing about the continuum is looking at the whole issue of monopolization of perception. which is a precursor to the hostage syndrome. And it basically means that I stop seeing the world through my eyes and I see it through the eyes of the person who has the power in the relationship. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. I was meeting with a couple. They were referred for couples counseling, but I have always done this in my private practice. I always separate people because I never know why somebody's really referring to me. And I speak to them each separately and then bring them together. But I want to hear the story and the new revised edition of the story before I see them together. So she came in first, and we started talking about, you know, where she lived and where she grew up. And she'd grown up in Long Beach, and she'd lived in Long Beach all her life, and gone to high school in Long Beach and college in Southern California and med school. So I assessed for levels of power, and here's what I found out. First of all, he's 20 years older than she is. Secondly, he's her med school supervisor. Thirdly, he's got big bucks. And fourthly, he's her first sexual experience. Now, when you look at levels of power, there's a, you know, it's pretty obvious, okay? She has school loans. She looks up to him. He's on a pedestal for her. Now, I said to her, you know, your family lives here. Do you and your partner see your friends? And she said, well, we don't see my friends a lot because he's kind of insecure about that. He's uncomfortable. And I thought, well, there's an age difference and maybe, you know, there's discomfort there. I said, well, what about you? Do you go to spend time with your friends, have dinner, go to a movie, whatever? She said, well, he's not real comfortable with that either. I said, well, what about your family? Do the two of you go and have dinners with your family, spend time with your sister and your niece? And she said, well, he thinks my family's kind of intrusive. And I said, well, what about you? Because you're pretty close to your family. Do you see your mom and your dad and your sister? She said, well, he's not real comfortable with that either. I said, how do you know he's not comfortable? She said, well, you know, I'll come home and he asks me a lot of questions. And I said, what kind of questions does he ask you? She said, well, he asked me if my family likes him, or if they say anything about him, and do I ever defend him, and was I really there, and where did I really go, and who am I attracted to, and all this kind of stuff. And just goes on. And she said, it's kind of like an interrogation. I said, is there anything else he does that would make you think that he doesn't trust you, or that he doesn't, that he's uncomfortable? She said, well, sometimes I come home and he won't talk to me. And I said, well, for how long? She said, well, it used to be like a few hours, but now it goes on for days, and it's very uncomfortable. And she said, so I figured if I just stuck it out for a while, he'd feel more secure, and he would change. Which is what I see continually, right? That a person believes, one of the things I try to tell people is, if you give up people you love for this other person you love, what you're actually doing is giving them evidence that you will give them up. So they don't get to feel more secure, they get to feel less secure. And not only that, they stop respecting you because you are not the person that they got attracted to. So all these things kind of work in reverse, but I don't say that right away. So I was talking to her for a while, and I said to her, do you think that it's okay for someone you love to tell you you can't spend time with other people that you love? And she said, I didn't used to, but now that I see it through his eyes. And that's what monopolization of perception is. He never laid a hand on her. He never had to. She lived in chronic apprehension. And when you look at battered women or victims of abuse, male or female, who are looking at life in chronic apprehension, and many people will tell you, I'm not afraid of my partner. So I ask, are you afraid of your partner when they get angry? Are you afraid of your partner when you disappoint your partner? That's when you begin to see fear, because you don't see fear right away, usually, unless somebody's been real extreme at first. Fear is gradual. There is the development of this chronic apprehension. And Jael Greenleaf, who worked with folks who lived with alcoholics, developed this term, and I use it in trials because I think it's a really great term, and the whole notion of it. She said, you know, people who are addicted party, they act out, they get support when they act out, they sometimes get support from their families, they have catharsis, they pass out. She said, people who live with addicts never get a break because they live in chronic apprehension of the next episode. And I think that is a very good metaphor for domestic violence, that there is the development of chronic apprehension. So when you're assessing, you want to look at where that person is in terms of their own fear of the other person, their own apprehension. Is the fear narrow? Has it expanded yet? Or are they afraid of a lot of things? Because I've worked with people who, you know, start out being afraid here, right? And then the fear generalizes to all kinds of areas of their lives, and they stop doing all kinds of things that they actually could get away with doing, but don't believe they can, because fear kind of mushrooms. So you just look at the going across the continuum, you tend to see more routine, more extreme abuse, more severe abuse. And then what's not on your sheet, because I keep working on this, are exacerbating factors. What could exacerbate the situation? What could make it worse than it is? And there are several things, I think. One is family of origin. It is very important to find out how this person has grown up. What is the context of their lives? What have they learned? What I say to the guys in group who say, a year, yeah, I have to do a year. I said, you know, have you ever tried to learn another language? You know how to learn another language? I mean, I've got Rosetta Stone, right? And I say, la mujer corre, you know? I mean, it's not much of a conversational kind of thing. I can say some things. I took 4 years of Spanish. I can still say some things, but I can't carry on a conversation. To carry on a conversation takes longer. To learn the idioms, to learn the expressions that you can use. When I was in Japan, I was speaking to a government bureau, and I wrote, straight from the dictionary, my Japanese dictionary, I wrote a greeting. And when I showed it to my friend who was Japanese, she said, oh, Alyce, you can't say that. she rewrote it for me, and because I just very, you know, took it from the dictionary, which you can't do. And so I say to them, you know, you learned a first language emotionally in your family. To learn a second language is going to take you some time. You may think a year is a long time, but have you ever tried to give up anything? Have you ever tried to give up biting your nails, or losing weight, or anything? I said that, it just, you know, just see what you think. And we have in West LA, and this is by way of hope, in West LA, over half of my group has been there over 3 years, voluntarily. In Long Beach, we have 2 guys that have been there over, one guy's been there 13 years, one guy, and the guy's been there 13 years, very, very violent history. Very violent, organized crime history. And he knows that if he doesn't stay in that group, that his veneer of civility. But he also has, at this point, one of the best relationships with a woman, you know, that I mean, where there is real balance of power. And she's a little thing. And she looks at him and says, do you really have to talk like that? And he just laughs and says, no, I guess I don't. And he's working on his swearing now. I mean, he's, you know, it's the levels. So I think that we've got to change belief systems, not only of the men, but of the women. Because we, you know, women still believe that if those relationships aren't working, and you look at the backlash, look at what young women are wearing now. We've gone back. We've gone back to higher heels than I wore at my prom in the 60s. I mean, and I fell into the door when my sister said, wait till you see Alyce, she's going to trip over her dress. That's what I did. I got caught by the back of my prom dress by my date. Very attractive look, by the way. But, so anyway, Family of origin stuff, real interesting. One of the guys in my group came in to group with a knife wound. Was from a family party. His uncles and his dad had gotten in a big fight. His father stabbed him. This guy was taken care of by two of the other guys in group who were doctors. This guy was a gangbanger. People are meeting each other that would never meet each other any other way. They're getting to know each other. They're getting to learn from each other. It's important stuff. I think of that in the shelter. People who would never associate start associating, and they learn so much. I mean, in a sense, we're doing cultural sensitivity, right, in shelters and gender sensitivity, all kinds of stuff that we have the opportunity to really change people's belief systems. I get very excited about that. And so, family of origin. Second thing is substance abuse. For the most part, substance abuse is an exacerbating factor. It's a disinhibitor, we know that. But I don't just look at, is somebody currently using? Look at how long they've been in recovery, if they're in recovery. Because if they've only been in recovery for a year, they can be even more dangerous. Because now we're dealing with somebody who's violent and they don't have an anesthetic and they really haven't done recovery. So you want to look at that. Karen Connell, who's one of the, Peggy knows Karen, one of the people well, she had her throat cut years ago and her 6-year-old son saved her life. And Karen's husband had been in AA for a year, but he didn't work the program. He worked the women in the program, right? So you really want to look at somebody's, I just had a client in a custody case, and she said, you know, my husband, I have a lot of hope. He's going to AA meetings now. He's been going for about 3 months. And I said, that's terrific. I said, ask him what step he's on. And she said, okay. So he came for a visit, and she said, I'm really glad you're going. And I said, and ask him who his sponsor is, or if he's got one yet. And so she said to him, oh, do you have a sponsor? He said, oh, no, I'm kind of checking it out, still looking for a sponsor. That could be true. And what step are you on? And he went, step? You know, I mean, anybody, you don't have to be an AA to know there are 12 of them, right? So, there are ways to find out things without being, you know, a big snoop. Anyway, so substance abuse is an issue. Also, how many prior domestically abusive relationships has this person been in? You know, what have they learned? Because the longer they're in them, the more denial there is, right? Makes perfect sense. The more they're in them, the more their bottom line goes down in terms of what they do, how insidious they might be, how demanding they might be. So if they've got priors, you want to know about the priors as best you can. And the fourth thing is any psychological kinds of issues. Now, I will tell you that most of the people who have been in my groups over the last 34 and a half years have not needed meds long term. You know, we often say, well, they're not mentally ill. Well, most of them aren't. What they are is post-traumatic stress disorder delayed, attachment disorder, that kind of thing. But we've had people that are bipolar. If they're on their medication, that's great. If they're not on their medication, not so great. Now, how do we look at how gender plays across the continuum? If you look at common couple aggression, high conflict, and abuse, you might see more gender equivalence. Still, all the data, when you look at battering and terrorism, is overwhelmingly male and female in heterosexual relationships. And that's looking at the crime data, FBI Unified Crime Reports, homicide data, looking at emergency room data, Violence Against Women Act study. We went through all the data when we redid our book and kept in some of the old stuff, because what you can see is the continuity, actually, of the data. It hasn't changed that much at all. And so, yes, we have women who perpetrate. Can't deny that. Is there gender equivalence? No, we haven't found gender equivalence. So I think that's important. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I want to show you this clip because it's from when I did the speaking on here on Snow White, was Snow White a battered woman? I'm telling you that the prosecutor went after that like crazy. And I couldn't watch any of the coverage during the trial, at all during the trial. So I wasn't on for 4 months. And I couldn't watch any of it because as an expert witness, you're not allowed to be tainted by any of the media stuff. I'll tell you, I think I'm probably the only person in that courtroom that wasn't tainted, because I'm sure I was in Arizona for 3 weeks and there was no way hardly to get away from it. The minute you turned on the news, it was on. It was on Good Morning America, it was on everywhere, and especially headline news. And I wanted to tell you, I wanted to say a couple things. I got the first day, because people couldn't email me, and I wasn't taking my calls, my partner was taking my calls. So my partner had to listen to all the death threats and all the names. It was pretty horrific. And I also got to listen to them while I was on trial. So I knew, first of all, when you went, we had security to go to the courthouse. We had 2, police officers, detectives, who walked us into the courthouse. And I didn't want to be scared all the time, so I would, take my watch, because they both look like Secret Service. They're dressed in suits, and they very attractive guys. And I'd go, POTUS is on the move. POTUS is on the move. I had to find something, because we were working, besides court, we were working 6 to 10 hours every day. I'd get back to the room, I couldn't sleep, because I was wired. And I also knew that the next day, I'd probably have to go up against Juan again. Now, what's different in Arizona is the jury gets to ask questions. So I had 150 jury questions. But the judge didn't screen out the jury questions. So, for instance, one of my jury questions was, why on April 3rd did you look at Jodi and shrug? No kidding. And I went, I don't know. And I wasn't trying to do that, but I shrugged, And then I said, well, it could have been, I had friends, because I went to high school and junior college and a few years of grade school in Arizona. So I had friends every day at the trial for me, which was terrific. Of course, the headline news made fun of that, because one of my friends, Troy, was giving me a back rub. He was just rubbing my shoulders. And they of course, made fun of that, because they looked through the little window. We thought it was private. People followed us when we went to eat. They took pictures. They portrayed it like we were on the public dole, that we were eating. Believe me, none of us even put in per diem. We paid for our own meals. I tried to do that to save Maricopa County some money. So I'm just going to give you an example of some of the stuff that I got. I hope you choke on a chicken bone, you fat BFD, you're all belly fat pig, you fat F, choke, 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 you fat disgusting pig. Burn in hell, you effing piece of shit. You deserve to die, you deserve to die, your children should die right in front of you. So, they're threats to my family. And it went on like that. Now, a lot of the people that called more than once. And the one that Detective Johnson, because Detective Johnson out of Long Beach PD came to our house. We had officers come to our house who told us, call. If you see, I freaked out one day because some guy was standing in the alley and I didn't know who he was. I'd never seen him before, and I called the police right away because I was a little, jumpy. Poor guy was just in a recovery house down the street. He got rousted up. Boy, he didn't stand back there anymore, I'll tell you. So, not even safe to be in recovery around me. So that went on, but there were people that made numerous calls. I got far more from battered women. And a guy who called me from Canada, there were men who called, very supportive. This man called me from Canada and he said, when I watched Juan Martinez with you doing the cross-examination, it reminded me of when I verbally abused my wife. Now, what I did was I've got a stack of cards and letters and fax, wonderful things from people, and I've got these things too, but I've answered every one of them. I've written a letter to everybody, or I've called everybody back, and I've even called people back who weren't nice to me, because I thought, well, I'm going to model some okay behavior. And there was a guy who called me and he said, I hope your career's in the toilet. I think it is. And thanks for testifying for Jodi. You got her convicted of first-degree premeditated murder. And I thought it was kind of cute that he said testifying. And I don't know why, but I called him because his number came up. And I said, hi, this is Alyce LaViolette. And there's like dead silence. And he said, really? And I said, yes. I said, I wanted to let you know my career's fine and that I only testify to what I believe in. That I was raised in a family to do the right thing and to stand up for people even when you're not happy about the result of standing up for people. And we started to talk, and we talked for 25 minutes. He's from Ohio, and found out he was a police officer. And he worked with victims of domestic violence. And he worked with sexual assault victims. And he said, Alyce, if you called to make me feel bad, I feel terrible. I said, that's not why I called you. And he said, I don't know why I got so caught up in this, but he said it never should have been filed as a death case. And I said, I agree with you. And he said, and it was obviously overkill. It was obviously not premeditated. And we started to talk, and we had a great talk. And at the end, Brian and I were BFFs. And he said, Alyce, could you do me a favor? And I said, well, if I can, I will. And he said, can you call back in an hour and a half? Because my wife's not going to believe I talked to you in person. So I called back in an hour and a half, talked to Dana. We're all close. I can stay with him if I come out. I got people in New Jersey. I've called people and thanked them for disagreeing with me without really calling me a bunch of bad names. And I called a woman back who said, I hear that you used funds from the county to fly to your daughter's wedding, and that you're using county money to help pay for her wedding, because my daughter lives in Flagstaff. And I said, I called her back, because when their names come, or their phone numbers, if they weren't totally vile, I would call them back. So I called her back and I said, hi. You know, and anytime you say your name, they all go. I mean, I just picture that, but I don't know that they're actually doing that. And she said, I said, you know, I wanted to let you know I understand your concern about people using county funds, because I know a lot of money. I know there's been over $2 million spent on this trial so far. So if you don't like, you know, and I didn't say this to her, but even if you're not coming from a place, you know, philosophically that you don't believe in the death penalty, practically you ought to believe in it, because it costs way more than incarcerating somebody. So I said to her, I wanted to let you know that I flew to my daughter's wedding, and I built in a case. I paid for the ticket myself so I wouldn't have to charge the county. And I built in a visit to Jodi and the defense team while I was there. And I said, and I wrote off 20% of my hours, and I didn't bill for per diem, even though I kept getting requests for it. And I wanted to let you know that. And she said, wow, you sound like an honest person. I said, I am. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know, for all the names people call you, you know, I'm 66. I know I'm not that person. You know, I know I'm not who they say I am on the internet. But I think about how that must be to be attacked in the social media anonymously for kids, for young people, even for people who just their self-esteem is teetering, because it's so horrific what they do. And one of my friends saved a newspaper for me. I was on the front page of the Arizona Republic, and there was a professor of journalism, and he said, from Columbia University of Digital Media and Journalism, he said, I've never seen anyone attacked like I've seen LaViolette attacked. And it's because I was on the stand for 12 days. It's because Nancy Grace and Dr. Drew and Jane Velez Mitchell and those folks on Headline News fueled hatred with social media and the ability to be anonymous. And they came together in an out-of-control courtroom with a bullying, abusive prosecutor. And it was like the perfect storm. And so I got these letters, but one of the guys who threatened to cut my effing throat and would tell me how a real man treated a C like me, actually his number came up. So Detective Johnson got a warrant and they tracked him down. And he was scared to death because here he's being tracked down by Long Beach PD, right? You guys, powerful. Look, okay. So Detective Johnson said to him, when he went through his father to get to him. So his father was very upset. And then he got to him. And the guys denied it at first, and then he couldn't deny it. And he said, let me play for you what you said to her. And he said, we can't even understand that. And he said, let me read to you what you said to her. So he read to him. What I said to Detective Johnson is, I want him to have a lesson. And him losing his job and going to jail isn't going to give him a lesson. Him being scared by the police is the first step in his lesson. But I said, what I want is for him to have to look at how this impacted me, why he did it, how it impacted me, how it impacted my family, and to write me a letter of apology. So I'm going to read that to you, because I got it. The past few months have given me a chance to reflect on my terrible decision-making and the actions that followed. At this point, I would like to let you know how ashamed and sorry I am for the things I said on the calls. It was beyond cowardly, and my parents would be ashamed if they heard the messages. I had let my emotions get the best of me, and my girlfriend had been abused in the past, which led me saying things I can't even believe I did thinking back on it. I know I could never be forgiven for them, and I will forever be haunted by it. I promise that you will never hear from me again in any form or way in the future. At this point, I wish you the best in your future endeavors. I have learned a valuable lesson that will forever be with me. I am so sorry for making your life more difficult than it had to be. And he signed his name. And I thought, you know, if somebody's going to learn anything, they have to learn not just through fear, but through empathy. And I wanted to model a non-vengeful kind of way. And I thought his girlfriend may have been abused in a way that Jodi wasn't. Because Jodi was psychologically abused, and nobody believed her for physical abuses, because of course there was no evidence and she had never made a report. But I believed it, and I read his rants. And he would go on for hours ranting, and I thought if she was in that room, there was no way he wouldn't have laid a hand on her. And so I believe that Jennifer, the defense attorney, Maria, the mitigation specialist, we believed it, and actually a lot of people believe it. And I wanted to read to you a woman who, a battered woman who, by the way, women were calling me saying, you've got to be strong, you've got to stand up to him, you're speaking for all of us. Which is why it says on the internet, no longer a voice for the voiceless. They would say things like, you're our hero. Actually, one of the first calls I got was from an advocate who had been an advocate for 18 years in domestic violence, and she said to me, I hope you're not going to set this movement back 50 years with your testimony. Because people looked at what Jodi did, which was terrible, and they didn't put it together. There was like no excuse to do that kind of thing. And she was, you know, not battered. But after this woman heard my testimony, she called me back and said, I think you've set the movement ahead. And this is a woman who said, who wrote to me. And she lives in California. She said, I was so beaten down until I watched the trial. I thought I would never get up again until I heard you, Alyce. She calls me Alyce. I felt like you were speaking to me and that God had sent you to us all. You gave me hope. You were speaking from the heart, and I could feel the heart. The arrows of your words hit the mark in my life, and I am so very grateful. When a person has an advocate, they have a chance to change. They have a chance to make a comeback. When someone listens with a heart of compassion, you begin to revive. I was inspired, I was driven to get up again. I felt like I was receiving a miracle. The world was against you, but I was alive again. I was looking for a compassionate advocate in my healthcare network and came up empty. Take your message, Alyce. You have earned another level of authority. My heart has been warmed. Jodi was lucky to have you for all those hours because she could experience what I experienced, although her situation was more dire. You gave her hope. Every person deserves a compassionate voice in their life. The message you sent out was, if only Jodi and Travis got help. It came through. Take your message and let your arrows hit the mark in others' lives. So, the calls I got from women and men that just said, you have to do this for us. And of course my friends and whatever just kept me going. They kept me going. So I wanted to end with this little clip. I couldn't watch anything till after the trial, but I've got 100 hours that I still haven't looked at. But this was actually kind of funny because he went after the Snow White thing that I did here, so I thought you guys might like to see it.
Right?
That is specific to adult relationship, adult intimate partner relationship, Mr. Martinez, and I have no information about the relationship between Prince Charming and Snow White. I don't know what their relationship was, so you're mischaracterizing that by saying that that can be applied to Snow White as a child. This is not about child abuse.
Well, let's talk about, for example, whether or not we can find some of the items that were present in the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and whether or not Snow White was a battered woman, okay? With regard to the conference agenda, that conference agenda that we're talking about, it dealt with adults, didn't it?
It dealt with adults.
Yes, it did. And in it, you said, is Snow White a battered woman? That was the title, right?
Objection, ask the answer.
Distinct.
And that being the case, ma'am, now you're trying to tell me that, well, no. I don't want to talk about Snow White now because it involved a child, right?
No, that's not what I said, Mr.
Well,
Martinez.
then...
Do you want me to answer that, Mr. Martinez?
Yes, I want you to answer me why it is now that you don't want to talk about Snow White as an adult when you did talk about Snow White as an adult when you made the presentation back in 2010.
I talked about Snow White in regard to growing up and what we believe about ourselves as men and women growing up. I did not talk about Snow White in an intimate relationship with the prince.
Intimate relationship, what?
King or whoever.
And my question was that, in this presentation, this involved adults that you were talking about, right?
I spoke to adults.
And it involved adult abuse, didn't it?
It involved gender. We were talking about gender and expectation about gender. And it was in a domestic violence conference, so I spoke about it in a domestic violence conference.
Right, and it involved adults, right?
It involved what we learn as children and bring into adulthood.
So it involved what you learn as children and what now?
And what we can bring into adulthood about what we learn as children.
Right, and so for example, if we have anger as an issue in the family, that's something that we can learn as a child and take into adulthood, which is what you told us about Mr. Alexander, right?
Correct.
And so we can talk about a number of things that are here and use this as a guide, can't we? To determine whether or not an individual is a victim of abuse, right?
Because I'm not sure where you're going.
I'm talking still about,
I'm not understanding this.
I'm talking about Snow White, Exhibit 558.
That is not applicable to Snow White and the prince's relationship, which is the relationship that this is about adult intimate partner violence. And you keep referring to Snow White as a child, and what I'm saying to you is that that's about adult intimate partner violence and not about her relationship with the prince, which I know nothing about.
And she did say that Snow White a battered woman, which would imply that she was involved with a man as an adult, right? You're saying that disregard that now, right? Because it doesn't mean what it says, right?
All right, we're going to take the recess at Monday, 9:30 a.m.
This is the end of the day, but this is what Headline News did with it.
Wow, talk about a cliffhanger. We are left. Trial is done.
Now, this is the part, this is the funny part.
Snow White, a battered woman. I couldn't make this up. Coming up, she's back. Juror number 5 makes a shocking appeal.
Okay, now here's the part.
Okay, the title is Snow White, a battered woman.
Was he still picked up with this?
This is what the media did.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm, right?
Yes, I'm not using the Brothers Grimm version, I'm using the Walt Disney cartoon.
The wicked stepmother in her circumstance is her mother, right?
I didn't say that.
No, I'm the one that's asking the question. Isn't that true?
I don't equate her mother with the wicked stepmother.
Anyone could see that the prince was charming. The only one for me.
Snow White is sort of being, and I use the term loosely, abused. Not in the technical sense, but she's not being treated correctly, right?
She's being abused as a child. She lived with the Seven Dwarfs, and according to the Disney version, she was pretty happy. I thought it was a cute little cottage, Mr. Martinez.
There's Seven Dwarfs that she's living with, right? No one of her own age is there, right?
I don't know the age of the dwarfs. Do you want the truth, Mr. Martinez, or do you want to answer that?
You seem to be having trouble answering my question.
Mr. Martinez, are you angry at me?
Is that important to you?
Wow. This is a death penalty murder trial, and this is where we are.
Yep.
Debating the age of the dwarfs.
So that was what my speaking engagement here got me on the stand for that, spending 2 hours talking about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But that was only the first 2 hours. It got worse. So listen, it's great to be home. It's great to be with you guys. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for being so supportive.
Just no idea. I haven't watched any of the coverage, but Alyce says it's all available on YouTube, so if you want entertainment, free entertainment. Alyce, thank you so much for being here, so much for donating your honorarium back to M.F.C.C Long Beach. We appreciate your support. Don't worry about that.